Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. It's the 4th of February, 2026. We are coming off a very strange press conference by Tom Homan this morning that I want to just start by talking about. This is on top of, ongoing horrific breaking news all over the country still. There's just some new footage this morning about somebody having their face smashed into the snow in Grand Rapids, Michigan, despite being here on legal status and being pinned down by 4 officers before being detained. This stuff is every day now, and it's really bad. But the press conference with Homan started out with something that appeared like it could be a tiny bit of good news. And I have to put it in proportion because it's not like great news, even if it's the case, which is essentially that they are going to draw down 700 ICE and CBP officers from Minnesota. Now, I have to remind everybody, there are 3,000 ICE and CBP officers on the ground there. So that would take it down to 2,300, which, by the way, just for proportion's sake, is roughly 4 times the size of the Minneapolis Police Department. It is not an indication that they have quit or that they're leaving or that the violence and brutality will not continue. What it looks like to me is, again, another effort to kind of pacify people, and particularly probably Democrats on the Hill who are, again, on the verge of conceding. This is one reason why today you absolutely must make your phone calls to the Senate about not giving ICE and CBP any more money. We have a budget extension now that has passed the House and the Senate that has been signed by the president. But what was carved out of that was funding for DHS. And that funding will expire on Friday. We need the Democrats. This is a situation where, like, the rest of the government is functioning. The GOP doesn't have any more leverage. And we need the Democrats to hold firm. So it's really critical to make your phone calls. Regardless, this seems to be one of those efforts, much like the bizarre announcement yesterday from Kristi Noem that they are now putting body cams on every officer, which, by the way, doesn't help anything. They have body cam footage from the murder of Alex Preddy because the officers that murdered him were wearing body cams. It does not stop them from doing anything. If anything, it just increases the surveillance state, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later on in the broadcast. It is as if they are trying to placate those who control whether or not ICE and CBP will get their funding renewed. And again, I just can't say enough about how much you have to make your voice heard about this with the Senate. Call your senators, call them multiple times, make your voice heard, okay? So Homan, in that context, first said, we're going to draw down these 700 officers, but then he went off. And essentially what he said was, I told you all that if the rhetoric didn't come down, there was going to be bloodshed. Not taking any accountability or responsibility for the fact that the only bloodshed that we've seen has come from ICE and CBP, not saying, it's our responsibility as ICE and CBP to make sure that we are not committing acts of murder, nothing like that. But again, another threat. And then on top of it, one of the things that we've seen happening recently in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area is that barricades are being put up to block ICE from moving in and out of neighborhoods. And in response to that, Homan said, and I have to say, I'm really grateful for the community on Blue Sky with how they've responded to this. You're not going to stop ICE. You're not going to stop Border Patrol. And that's essentially like a threat. The threat is like, you better not try to stop us or we're going to do something worse. It's been pointed out to me this morning that many good Minnesotans have really taken that as a fuck no, I won't do what you tell me moment this morning, who are really like, you want to bet? That's kind of where we are now. All right. And I have to say that this is also, to me, a bit of a sign that they are running scared, because the resistance in Minneapolis, the organizing in Minneapolis and in Minnesota writ large, because I don't want to leave out St. Paul and all the suburbs and all the small towns that are currently being invaded, has been remarkable. like incredibly effective, a model for every other place that is likely to be invaded soon, Philadelphia, to take note of. All right. And I also just have to point out that the word on this is that Homan is, in fact, next going to be deployed to Philadelphia. And as somebody who grew up in the Philadelphia suburbs, like kind of equidistant between Philadelphia and New York, I'm just going to tell you guys, they got another thing coming in Philly. In addition to the fact that Larry Krasner is the district attorney there, who is one of the founding members of the Federal Accountability Project now, who has promised on camera as recently as yesterday that he will arrest and prosecute ICE officers who break the law in Philadelphia. They also have no idea. I'm kind of laughing about it just from the standpoint of like the Philadelphia Phillies fans, let alone like, you know, hockey fans in Philadelphia. If you know anything about the Flyers, oh my God. I don't think they have any idea what they're going to be up against. But I do have to say this, you know, like the fact that Homan is having to make statements like this, you're not going to stop ICE, you're not going to stop Border Patrol, is a sign of the fact that they actually are at this moment quite threatened in many ways by what is happening on the streets. They look weak, and I think they know that. And that is a reason to keep going. That is not a reason to back down. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but that is a reason to absolutely keep going. The Nation, by the way, the incredible political journal that Elie Mystal writes for, I love the writers over there, by the way. They interviewed me like 25 years ago now. Wow, long, long time ago. Katha Pollitt, back when I was doing human rights litigation, and they just have such an incredible historic legacy. They have nominated the people of Minnesota for the Nobel Peace Prize. Again, I just am really grateful for the way in which like positive media, good media is doing great work right now. We're going to talk more about that in a second too, because unfortunately we have some news on that stuff today as well. So in any event, you know, I think this is a sign that they're running scared. I also think it's actually an invitation to ramp up additional resistance. And that's the silver lining on all of this. Okay. So this morning, the Washington Post laid off a third of their staff. And the former executive editor of the Washington Post wrote an absolutely scathing letter about how this all falls at Jeff Bezos's feet, about his bending the knee to Donald Trump, about the fact that they have essentially under Bezos's leadership expanded the opinion section of the paper to the point where there is no moral illegitimacy for anything. About how, you know, so many people have been so disappointed in the way in which Bezos has not at all taken responsibility for any of the recent downturn in subscribers and everything else to the Washington Post. And honestly, there is a part of me, it makes me very sad in a certain way, because we all know the Washington Post held a legacy position, especially coming out of Watergate and in, you know, the last few decades since. It's more than a few decades now, of really being one of the most successful and prominent investigative journalism outlets ever. And now here we are with essentially the Washington Post folding because Bezos bought it and essentially drove it into the ground. We can have debates about whether that was intentional or accidental. I think there's an argument to be made that it certainly has been intentional in the last 2 years, at least. You know, the refusal to endorse a presidential candidate, the bending of the knee once Trump was reelected. I just have to, you know, really truly point out that this is obvious and we all saw it coming. And also that there have still been an enormous number of incredibly quality journalists in the Washington Post who are getting totally screwed by this. They basically fired their entire books department this morning. They fired several opinion columnists, including one opinion columnist who just yesterday wrote about the fact that institutions failing to stand up to Trump is part of the moral rot of America. And so I haven't been a subscriber to the Washington Post since they failed to endorse Kamala Harris. And I do really feel for the people in this audience. Some people on the Patreon feed this morning were commenting about it, about how it is really sad to watch an iconic outlet like this just crumble, and watch journalists have to, you know, kind of fend for themselves. And so, you know, this is a point where, again, I have to remind you all to please support independent media. A lot of these people are going to land at independent media sites. It is very important to support the media that you consume, that you find reliable, that you find trustworthy, maybe that you watch every day. Little perk there. And also to keep in mind that it's a rough road out there for journalists and commentators generally, as our entire media ecosystem kind of crumbles and rearranges. So, yeah, sad moment, and also entirely predictable. And 100% the fault of Jeff Bezos. Like, somebody on the feed this morning was a little bit like, maybe I shouldn't have ended my subscription because then the paper wouldn't have gone under. I will just tell you that Bezos would have done this anyway. There's not anything that any one of us could have done to stop it. And there are already people who have fled, Jen Rubin, Karen Attiah, who I think is like one of the, most amazing journalists of our era, who was Jamal Khashoggi's editor. Again, so many great people who have left the Post and many more as of today who have been forced out. So please support independent media and support those folks in particular today. Okay. Yesterday, I actually love this story. I was like looking forward to talking about this story on the broadcast as soon as this broke yesterday. Yesterday, a government attorney, this is somebody who is not with the DOJ. There's been some misreporting about this. She's actually a government attorney hired by the Department of Homeland Security, and she's been assigned to Minneapolis, had an absolute meltdown in court. Like, beyond the kind of meltdown that kind of like could cost you your job in any other normal era. She was asked by the judge in the middle of a hearing why the DOJ had not complied with like 80 plus orders that he had issued. And her response was, the system sucks. I'm quoting right now. And I quote, the system sucks. The job sucks. And you should hold me in contempt because at least then I could get 24 hours of sleep. Now, as somebody who was a trial lawyer for like 15 years, there is a part of me that has deep respect for this, because for those of you who don't know, and there's a backstory on this particular woman, by the way, which I'll mention in a minute. But for those of you who don't know, being a trial lawyer is a brutal job, whether it's with the DOJ or the government or whether it's in private practice. One of the reasons why I left trial lawyering, which I loved in many ways, I hated the business of the law, but I really loved being in court, was because I had basically been working 80-hour weeks for 15 years by the time that I left. And I had really serious concerns, not just about my own health, but about like how I was going to raise a family, how I was going to have kids, even if I was racing all over the world and the country 3 weeks, a month, and then having these trial preps that would run all night sometimes, appellate brief writing that would run through 2 all-nighters. That happened to me once, and all-nighters were regular. How I would kind of keep going. Well, it turns out this particular attorney had been assigned, 89 new cases in the last 2 weeks. These are all cases, by the way, that are cases where ICE and CBP have rounded up protesters or other people and thrown them in jail and are now trying to prosecute them on faulty or non-existent evidence. And these are the reason why the judge was so upset is because these people now have release orders and they're not being released. And that, of course, is by design. The system, as she pointed out, I got to give this woman credit, is functioning as designed, right? But also, if you are an attorney, if you are a trial lawyer and you have let's just say, arguably, she's got 100 cases on her docket right now. Not only is she not sleeping, but there is no way that she is effectively representing her client, evil as it may be, in court. So apparently, as of this morning, she's now been reassigned. She's been taken off duty in Minneapolis. Nobody knows where she's been sent. But I have to say that this is also a sign of what morale looks like inside the legal bodies that are required right now to handle these incredibly challenging and honestly fascist false prosecutions of people. In addition to that, yesterday, there was an announcement that the DOJ is now requiring all 913 U.S. attorneys' offices to assign 1 to 2 lawyers to what they're calling an emergency strike force. The reason why they are doing this is because, for instance, in Minnesota, and we discussed this on Monday, they have now lost a total of 14 prosecutors out of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota because they had orders from the DOJ to investigate Renee Good's wife, because they were told that they could not investigate or prosecute Renee Good or Alex Pretty's murder, and people quit. So they have a situation now where ethical lifetime servants inside the Department of Justice are refusing to do the bidding of the DOJ, and that is leaving them with huge gaps in prosecutorial staffing all over the country. This, by the way, is not a bad thing, right? As much as I understand there are people who would like those offices to be staffed by ethical people. If you are under orders to prosecute people for non-existent crimes, you're also putting your own bar license at risk, in addition to the fact that you are, doing something wildly amoral. All right. So this strike force, I have no idea how this is going to work. I'll just tell you guys, my trial practice when I was litigating was nationwide, in some instances actually international, but was nationwide. And one of the things about federal court practice is that, let me just back up for a second and explain how people get a law license, because people here may not understand that. When you graduate from law school, you have to take a bar exam. And that bar exam usually includes something called a multi-state component, which is on federal law, and then a state component based on the state where you are seeking to be licensed. And you get your bar license in a state. The state authorities make the determination as to whether or not you are actually going to be a licensed attorney. From there, if you want to practice in federal court, you have to be admitted to the bar of each individual federal court. Here's an example from me, okay? The first place that I took the bar, and the only place I took the bar because I waived in after that, was in the state of Virginia. The year that I took it, there was like a 45% pass rate. It was really low, okay? Like someday I'll tell the story of what taking the bar exam there was like. It was very unpleasant. People were very stressed out. That's where I passed the bar. And then the first federal district court that I was admitted to was in the Eastern District of Virginia, which, by the way, is where Trump's assigned U.S. attorney, Lindsay Allegan, was just booted. All right. So my first federal court argument was in the Eastern District of Virginia in Alexandria, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. Then I got admitted in the District of Columbia by waiving in, and I had to request to be admitted to the district court for the District of Columbia, which is the federal court. Okay. Then as my caseload expanded, I moved to New York. I waived into New York. I had to be admitted to the Southern District of New York court because you can't practice there without being admitted. Then one wild time, I had a case in the Eastern District of Wisconsin. I had to apply to be admitted to that court. So I have huge questions about how this strike force is going to actually work. Because it's not like as a licensed attorney, even one for the DOJ, that you can just randomly walk into any federal court in the country and be like, Your Honor, I'm here on behalf of the government. You have to actually be admitted. And part of that is because the rules and procedures are different for every single federal court in the country. Okay. Every judge has their own set of rules. There are local rules you have to comply with. And then, of course, there are rules that apply to the district court at large. So essentially, this strike force is like, we're going to pick up people from all over the country and dump them in a jurisdiction for 2 weeks and make them defend the undefendable. And we're going to take them away from their families and their lives and insist that they go into these courts where the judges don't know them. They don't know anybody else. They have no colleagues. They have no paralegal support staff. They've got nothing that they would need in order to be able to support their defense of these cases. And force them to do it. It's insane. I actually, when I read this last night, I was like, first of all, this isn't going to work logistically. But second of all, who would ever want to keep that job? Nobody. So there are really big problems inside the DOJ right now. Again, not a bad thing. And I'm going to remind everybody that when this whole thing is over, in addition to the things that we've been talking about here for 2 weeks, like lustration and transitional law and the way in which we're going to need separate bodies of accountability for everything that has gone wrong, the DOJ, if it remains, can be rebuilt. And there are going to need to be various ethical standards and legal changes to make sure that the DOJ is never abused in this manner again. But for now, the DOJ is falling apart. And frankly, that also means that their malicious prosecution of protesters is also falling apart. And again, this woman losing her shit yesterday in court, I actually mad respect it. And it totally is a sign. All right. We have some questions about Epstein still in terms of, who could investigate. We spent most of Monday's broadcast talking about the initial complaints against Epstein in 2005 and what is contained in the Epstein files now about that investigation and how it went sideways. The investigation actually didn't go sideways. What happened was they cut a plea deal, but first a state court plea deal and then a federal court plea deal that is abhorrent, that no ethical prosecutor would ever have agreed to. And there are really big questions about what happened with the Palm Beach state's attorney. Again, I have to remind everybody, Pam Bondi had nothing to do with this. It's really bothering me how her name keeps coming up. It was the state attorney for Palm Beach at the time. Pam Bondi was the state attorney for Hillsborough County in Tampa on the other side of the state. She had nothing to do with this. No authority over it, no decision-making, nothing. And also Alex Acosta's sweetheart deal on behalf of the DOJ after this 53-page memo was written about all the massive number of crimes that Epstein and his cohorts had committed. And they literally had a date to pick him up, to arrest him and prosecute him. And then Acosta cut this deal. So somebody asked a question on the Patreon feed about who could investigate that. there's a number of ways that this could go. A state, if there was a state, like let's say hypothetically New York, that had an interest in investigating whether or not a deal had been cut that should not have been cut, could potentially assign a special prosecutor or investigator to it. The more likely way that this could go under a new and rebuilt DOJ in a Democratic administration is that a special counsel could be appointed to investigate Alex Acosta's sweetheart deal. Obviously, a similar state body could be set up in Florida, but I have no hope for that. So I'm not even really going to talk about it. I don't think DeSantis is going to set out to assign some kind of special prosecutor in Florida to investigate why Epstein got off scot-free in 2006. So that is how that would have to take place. But I'm just going to tell you guys, this story is so far from over. And, the cover-up that is currently underway, currently ongoing, inside the DOJ, I think will eventually lead to an additional investigation of Pam Bondi, of Kash Patel, of Todd Blanche, of Emile Beauvais before he became a Third Circuit judge. I think there's a lot of room here for additional investigation coming out of what we already know. All right. Last thing I want to talk about today is something that has been coming up on Blue Sky a lot lately, and that it just feels really important to talk about here because, some days on this broadcast, we've got 50,000 people watching this before, the day is out. Some days it's only 10,000 of you, but I appreciate all of you anyway. And the point that I want to make here is about operational security. So I shared a little story last night on Blue Sky, and I want to just share it here. And I want to share it in a way that is informed by what rapid response trainers are talking about all over the country right now. Okay. So yesterday, I became privy to a story of a group of white women. They're in an East Coast state, I'm not going to tell you where, who are organizing purportedly to feed and support their undocumented neighbors who may be afraid to leave the house because of ICE. And as a part of this work, not only have they not kept what they're doing confidential, but they are videotaping themselves doing food assessments and pulling meals together. And they are filming themselves inside people's homes so that you can tell where they live and who else is in the room. And they are streaming those videos to Facebook. This is an operational security gaffe, the likes of which I honestly didn't think we would hear about in this era because it is so profoundly dumb. And, I have to put it in those terms because it is stupid. And let me just explain also that at this rapid response training that I was a part of over this weekend, there were a multitude of times where I had to stop people from taking photographs of the room in which people were being trained. Because, by the way, if you have not considered this, there may be people at a rapid response training who could be targeted by ICE and CBP, okay? I want to just mention a couple of things that have been discussed at lots of rapid response trainings, but that are especially significant to mention here, okay? And, I have to say I had a moment this morning when I was getting dressed where I thought about the fact that I left Facebook in 2019 and people got really mad at me about it. This broadcast used to live on Facebook. It lived on Facebook for the first 4 years that we did it. 4 years that we did it, it lived there. And I left in the middle of 2019 because at that point, 7 years ago, I was very concerned about what we had learned about what Facebook was giving to the federal government. Okay. That has only accelerated since then. All right. And what rapid response trainers are telling people right now is that if you are doing any kind of support work right now for vulnerable people, you should not, under any circumstances, be doing any of it on Facebook Messenger, on Threads, on Instagram, or on WhatsApp, because we know that Facebook is actually collaborating with the federal government in helping to track activists and organizers who are trying to do this work and are talking about it on those platforms. All right. So let me just make something really clear here. You could be being tracked and would never know it. the Facebook's cooperation has been such that they are not getting subpoenas for this information. They are willfully, according to what I'm being told, opening up essentially their data for anybody in the federal government who wants it. And that's on top of the fact that rapid responders also know that groups on Facebook, including groups that are being housed on Facebook Messenger, are being actively monitored by the federal government. Okay. So if you are running a group that is serving people who are vulnerable and you are showing video or talking about it on any meta platform, it is not an unreasonable expectation to assume that you, based on your identifying features, including your face, because we all know Facebook uses facial recognition technology and was an early adopter of it, you should expect that you could be followed, or anyone on your team could be followed to the home of someone that you were trying to help. And that person would then be compromised, arrested, deported, and possibly killed. So I have to say something to everybody here who is doing this kind of work, all right? And there have been a lot of discussions on, like, lately about how operational security shouldn't matter, right? These are new activists, for instance, who are like, operational security is gatekeeping. Bullshit, okay? Bullshit. Operational security saves lives. And if you are right now planning to help anybody, trying to help anybody who may potentially be a victim of this regime, there are no circumstances, zero circumstances in which you should be talking about that work on social media, not just even on Facebook, okay? Like, lives depend on this. Your life may depend on it, okay? And that's on top of the fact that if people are not yet aware of this issue, you need to know about flock cameras. Flock cameras, if you are, like driving around your neighborhood and you see a camera attached to a pole that has one of these like slanted solar panels attached to it, that's a flock camera. Flock cameras are being used by law enforcement to share information with the federal government, in some instances willingly and in some instances not, okay? Flock cameras monitor not just license plates, but your face. They are being used to take pictures of people who are driving on a given street, who maybe are people who they are tracking from place to place and location to location. They actually can also take video. So this goes beyond like just what you yourself might be posting on social media, which is bad enough. But if you are somebody who they identify as potentially being in contact with people who are marginalized, you can be followed simply by the cameras in your own neighborhood. This is one reason, by the way, why it is really important to know whether or not your community has, in fact, approved what are being referred to as license plate readers, which are not just that, and whether they are flock cameras specifically. Many flock cameras stream live to the internet with no security protocols whatsoever. That also raises additional security risks for like crazy people in your neighborhood. And then in addition to that, they are very notoriously easily hacked. And so the thing I also want people to understand here is that ICE and CBP, again, do not need a subpoena to access those recordings, that information, your license plate, your face, okay? I got into it a little bit this morning on Blue Sky with somebody who was saying like, well, we need to recruit people to do the kind of grocery runs that we're doing. And we can serve so many people if we talk about it on Facebook. Are you joking? Like, one of the great things about grassroots organizing, as it has been run in this country for centuries, is that if you build effective networks of trust, you can do amazing things that nobody ever knows about. Okay. And, I will just say this. There are things I have done in my activism career that literally no one will ever know about except the people who are impacted. Lives that I personally have saved. Not going to brag about it. Have no desire for anybody to know about it. Don't want to put anybody whatsoever at risk. And again, this is a moment, if ever there was a moment, to stop seeking street cred, to stop seeking praise, to stop doing the signaling on social media that you're one of the good ones, and just do the work, okay? I am very concerned about stories like this, I have to tell you, because they put already marginalized people at deep risk, okay? You do not need to be a reason for someone who is marginalized to potentially be put in the crosshairs. So I want people to understand that if you are organizing right now, the only place that you should be doing that organizing digitally is on Signal. That is end-to-end encrypted. It cannot be hacked as it's running from one place to another. It's not perfect, okay? There are ways in which the federal government has from time to time been able to access Signal through subpoenas and other means, but it is way safer than talking about any of this on any social media platform, including WhatsApp and Messenger, okay? The other thing that everybody here should be aware of, because it is really critical that you get this, is that if you are walking around with a phone, you are doing rapid response and you are videotaping ICE. You are engaged in being in contact with other people, even on a Signal chat on your phone while you are doing this work. You sure as shit better have your biometrics disabled. You better not be opening your phone with your face or your laptop with your fingerprint. Because I will tell you something about Fourth Amendment law as it stands right now, okay? The federal government does not need a warrant to force you to open your phone with your face or your laptop with your fingerprint. They do need a warrant if they need a code, okay? So if you are doing any kind of activism work whatsoever, do not be opening your devices with biometrics. Mine are permanently set to PIN codes and will stay that way until this is all over. And the last thing that I just want to mention here for everyone else is that if you are somebody who is taking video, if you are someone who is engaged in observing ICE, do not edit your videos because you will destroy them for purposes of evidence, and make sure that you are storing them somewhere that is not in the cloud. Okay. That means on a hard drive, on a thumb drive, somewhere where they can be preserved. All right. Because the last thing that we want is them being stored in the cloud through a tech company that is cooperating with the administration where the evidence can be destroyed. All right. So operational security right now is critical. And again, I'm going to say this, I've been saying this for months. If you have not been trained in rapid response, you need to get trained, even if you're not going to be the person on the street corner, because you need to understand what the operational protocols are for keeping people safe, for making sure that you're not doing something that is going to put people at risk, and for making sure that you're acting in a way that it not just complies with the law, but also makes sure that your safety and the safety of others is protected. All right. I know that it has become very trendy, in the last 10 years to put photographs of protests and photographs of gatherings and video of like all your good deeds on social media. Please don't do that right now. Like you have a choice to make. Everybody has a choice to make. I've said this a lot in the last couple of weeks about like who we're going to be in this era and what we're going to do. That includes whether or not you are in this because you really want to help people, or whether you're in it in part, and you got to be honest with yourself about this, even to the smallest extent, because you want people to think you're a good person, okay? There's a really big difference between those two things. Yes, of course, they can overlap, but this is a moment where you've got to refuse to center yourself. Refuse to center the people that you're working with. Center on the people who are in the direct line of harm and do everything that you can to keep those people safe, okay? So incredibly critical that you are like mindful of this. And I'm going to say this going forward, like I've known for at least the last 8 years that they've had facial recognition technology in every protest that I've organized or been to. Do not give them extra help by posting photographs of people's faces at the events and the protests that you go to. You are giving the federal government ammunition. Don't do it. Okay. That's my little lecture for today on operational security. This is a topic that we're going to talk about a lot more here going forward because there's a lot more to be said about it in this era. Like we are living in a surveillance state. It's time for everybody to come to terms with it. And also, I just want to remind everybody, please call your senators today. Demand no more funding for ICE and CBP. Ask them to stand on principle and refuse to fund the DHS, okay? There's going to be a vote on that by the end of the week. It is incredibly important that we make our voices heard. All right, everybody. I will see you back here on Friday. Reminder, we are now on our Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. So I will be back here on Friday. There will also be a bonus broadcast for our Patreon subscribers on Friday afternoon. You want to get in on that? Or you want to just like support this show? I would greatly appreciate your subscriptions over at patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $5 a month. That's less than 25 cents a broadcast. You can ask me questions for 3 hours before the show. You do get those bonus broadcasts every Friday, and you get to be a part of an incredibly great community among other perks of people over there who are really doing incredibly good stuff. All right, everybody, I will catch you on Friday. And thanks so much for being here, and take care of yourselves, and please stay safe. All right, bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.